The 20-year-old wolf dog's amber eyes snapped open in the darkness, his arthritic body trembling as an all-too-familiar scent drifted through the Colorado mountain air. Shadow's massive head lifted from his bed beside 16-year-old Emma Blackwood's sleeping form, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, the same sound he'd made 2 decades ago when he'd first smelled evil. The scent wasn't random. It was him. Emma jolted awake as Shadow's claws scraped desperately against the hardwood floor, his cancer-ravaged legs struggling to support his weight. "What's wrong, boy?" she whispered. But the old wolf dog was already positioning himself between her and the window, hackles raised despite the pain radiating through his spine. Outside, footsteps crunched on autumn leaves. 3 shadows moved toward the isolated cabin. Emma's grandmother was 70 miles away at the hospital, the nearest neighbor 3 miles through dense forest, and her cell phone showed no signal. Shadow's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that had once saved this family. Tonight, Marcus Morrison had returned to finish what he'd started when Emma was just 2 years old, but he had no idea that his greatest mistake was about to become his final judgment. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Emma Blackwood had learned to read Shadow's moods like weather patterns, and tonight felt like a gathering storm. At 16, she possessed the quiet strength that comes from shouldering adult responsibilities too young, working 3 jobs to afford the $47 pills that kept her dying companion comfortable, maintaining a household while her grandmother Martha battled her own health demons, and carrying the weight of being the last Blackwood in Elk Ridge, Colorado. The mountain cabin had been her whole world since the day her parents died when she was 2. Built by her father, Detective James Blackwood, the house sat like a fortress among towering pines, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor and 20 from town. Most 16-year-olds would feel isolated. Emma felt protected. Every weathered board, every creaking step, every hidden corner held memories of the family she'd lost too young to remember clearly. Shadow had been her constant through it all. The wolf dog hybrid, 75% gray wolf, 25% German shepherd, had arrived as a 3-month-old pup on the worst day of Emma's life. Her father had been training him as a specialized K9 unit, designed to track and protect rather than attack. Now, at 20 years old, Shadow was ancient by wolf standards, his once powerful frame reduced to jutting ribs and trembling legs. Bone cancer had settled deep in his spine, each movement a small agony he bore with stoic dignity. Emma worked at Morrison's Diner downtown. The irony of the name never lost on her grandmother. Martha Blackwood, 68 and sharp as a surgical blade, had raised Emma with a curious combination of fierce protection and practical wisdom. A retired veterinarian, Martha possessed an unusual knowledge of criminal psychology that she attributed to too many true crime shows. She'd driven to Denver General 3 days ago for what she'd called routine heart tests, leaving Emma alone with Shadow for the first time in years. The isolation had never bothered Emma before, but lately she'd noticed things. A truck that seemed to follow the same route passed their driveway too often. Fresh tire tracks in the mud after storms. The feeling of being watched when she hung laundry on the line. Shadow had been restless too, his failing senses compensating with heightened awareness of threats Emma couldn't perceive. Tonight was different. The October storm had knocked out phone and internet service, and Martha's surgery had been moved up unexpectedly. Emma had gotten the message just before the lines went dead. Complications, overnight stay, don't worry. But Emma did worry. About Martha, about Shadow's labored breathing, about the $60 in her wallet that represented her entire savings after buying Shadow's medication. She'd dreamed of becoming a veterinarian like her father had been a detective, following the family tradition of protecting and serving. Those dreams felt distant now, overshadowed by the immediate reality of keeping Shadow comfortable and Martha healthy. Some nights Emma wondered if she was strong enough to carry the weight of being the last guardian of the Blackwood legacy. Tonight, she was about to discover exactly how strong she really was. The first sign of trouble came at 11:47 p.m. when the last flicker of electricity died throughout the house. Emma had been dozing in the living room chair, Shadow's massive head resting across her feet like a warm, breathing blanket. The sudden darkness jolted her awake, but it was Shadow's reaction that sent ice through her veins. The old wolf dog's body went rigid, a sound emerging from his throat that she'd never heard before, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper, but something primal and terrified. "Easy, boy," Emma whispered, reaching for the flashlight she always kept nearby. Shadow's condition meant power outages during storms could be dangerous. No heat for his arthritic joints, no way to keep his medication refrigerated. But as her fingers found the switch, Shadow's behavior grew more agitated. He struggled to his feet despite the obvious pain, positioning himself between Emma and the front windows with movements that spoke of ancient instincts overriding present limitations. Outside, the October storm that had been threatening all evening finally unleashed its fury. Wind howled through the pines, sending branches scratching against the roof like skeletal fingers. But underneath the natural symphony, Emma detected something else. Deliberate sounds that didn't belong to the weather. Footsteps on gravel, the soft crunch of boots on fallen leaves. Voices, low and urgent, discussing something she couldn't quite make out. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed her cell phone, praying the storm hadn't knocked out the cell towers too. No signal. The landline was dead as well, the familiar dial tone replaced by empty silence. She was truly alone, 20 miles from town, with only Shadow between her and whoever was approaching through the storm. Marcus Morrison moved through the darkness with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent 20 years thinking about this moment. Prison had given him plenty of time to plan, to remember every detail of the Blackwood property, to obsess over the family that had destroyed his life. The scar across his left cheek throbbed with phantom pain as lightning illuminated the familiar outline of the cabin where his nightmares began. "Power's out," whispered Kyle Brennan, Marcus's former cellmate and current partner. At 28, Kyle possessed the lean hunger of someone who'd never known financial security. "Phone lines, too. Kids all alone up here." "Good," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an odd mixture of satisfaction and dread. "Just like we planned." Danny Rivers brought up the rear, his 19-year-old frame tense with reluctance. This was supposed to be a simple robbery. Grab whatever cash and valuables they could find, get out clean. But something about Marcus's obsession with this particular house unsettled him. The older man spoke about the Blackwood family with a personal hatred that went beyond professional criminal interest. "You sure about this, Marcus?" Danny asked for the third time that evening. "Kid's just a teenager. There's got to be easier targets." Marcus turned, and even in the darkness, Danny could feel the weight of his stare. "This isn't about easy, boy. This family owes me 20 years of my life. Time to collect what's mine." Inside the cabin, Emma watched the shadows move past her windows with growing terror. 3 figures, at least, circling the house like predators evaluating prey. Shadow had managed to drag himself to the front door, his body blocking the entrance despite trembling legs. The medications that usually kept his pain manageable had worn off hours ago, but something deeper than pharmaceutical relief was driving him now. The sound of breaking glass from the kitchen window made Emma's decision for her. Someone was inside. Shadow's head snapped toward the sound, and for just a moment, Emma saw a flash of the powerful guardian he'd once been. His hackles rose despite his illness, and that primal sound emerged again, deeper now, more threatening. "Stay behind me," Emma whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Shadow or herself. She grabbed her father's old baseball bat from the hall closet, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. 20 years old, the Louisville Slugger had been James Blackwood's pride and joy, a relic from his college days. Emma had never imagined she'd need to use it as a weapon. Footsteps moved through her kitchen now, deliberate and confident. Male voices, low but audible over the storm. "Nice place," someone said. "Shame it's so isolated." "Spread out," came another voice, older and commanding. "Check every room. And somebody shut that damn dog up before he wakes half the county." Emma's blood turned to ice water. They knew about Shadow. This wasn't random. These men had planned this, studied her home, learned her routines, but they didn't know about Shadow's true nature, didn't understand that 20 years ago he'd faced down a killer and won. Tonight, despite his age and illness, he was prepared to do it again. The floorboards creaked as someone approached the living room. Emma raised the bat, her father's voice echoing in her memory. "Never swing for the fences, Princess. Just make contact and run." But there was nowhere to run, and Shadow couldn't move fast enough to escape. They would face this together, just as they'd faced everything else. The living room fell into a tense silence broken only by Shadow's labored breathing and the storm raging outside. Emma pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway, baseball bat raised as footsteps approached through her kitchen. The first figure to appear was young, maybe early 20s, with nervous eyes that darted around the room before landing on Shadow's imposing form blocking the hallway. "Jesus," Danny Rivers breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. "That's not a dog." Kyle Brennan pushed past him, flashlight beam dancing across the room until it found Emma's pale face. "Well, well, what do we have here?" His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to intimidating others. "Little girl's got herself a pet wolf." But it was the third man who made Shadow's entire body go rigid with recognition. Marcus Morrison stepped into the light, and 20 years of suppressed memory crashed over the old wolf dog like a tidal wave. The scent, that unmistakable combination of cheap cologne, cigarettes, and something darker that Shadow's canine brain categorized as pure malevolence, flooded his senses. This was the man who had brought death to his family, who had shattered the peaceful world Shadow had known as a puppy. A sound emerged from Shadow's throat that made all three intruders freeze. It wasn't a bark or a growl, but something deeper, more primal, the voice of an ancient predator recognizing its most hated enemy. Despite his arthritic joints and the cancer eating at his bones, Shadow forced himself to stand straighter, hackles rising like silver daggers along his spine. Marcus stared at the wolf dog, his hand unconsciously rising to touch the scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. 20 years in prison hadn't dimmed the memory of those teeth sinking into his flesh, the agony that had nearly cost him his eye, the humiliation of being brought down by an animal barely out of puppyhood. But this couldn't be the same creature. That wolf would be long dead by now. "Impossible," Marcus whispered, but his body knew the truth even as his mind rejected it. The same amber eyes, the same massive build, the same fearless stance that said, "You will not pass." This was his nightmare-made flesh, aged and weakened, but still defiant. Emma watched the strange tableau with growing confusion. Something was happening between Marcus and Shadow that went beyond the normal reaction of guard dog to intruder. Shadow's behavior was personal, intimate in its hatred. The way he positioned himself, the specific tone of his warning growl, even the slight favor he gave his right rear leg, all of it spoke of muscle memory, of a confrontation that had happened before. "You know each other," Emma said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. It wasn't a question. Marcus's eyes snapped to her face, really seeing her for the first time. The resemblance to James Blackwood was unmistakable. The same stubborn jawline, the same intelligent gray eyes, the same way of standing that suggested inner strength despite physical disadvantage. This was the baby who had slept upstairs while he'd killed her parents, who had somehow survived that night to grow into this defiant teenager. Emma Blackwood. Marcus said her name like a curse. You've grown up. The casual familiarity in his voice made Emma's knees weak. This man knew who she was, had known her parents. The pieces began clicking together with horrible clarity. The deliberate targeting of her isolated home, the knowledge of Shadow's presence, the personal hatred she could feel radiating from him like heat from a fire. Danny Rivers looked between Marcus and Emma with growing alarm. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? You said this was just a robbery." "Shut up," Marcus snapped, never taking his eyes off Shadow. The wolf dog had taken a painful step forward, placing himself even more directly between the intruders and Emma. Despite his obvious agony, Shadow's stance spoke of absolute determination. He would not yield. Kyle, impatient and greedy, stepped toward Emma with predatory intent. "Look, sweetie, just tell us where the money is and nobody gets hurt, starting with that overgrown mutt." Shadow's response was instantaneous. Despite his age and illness, he launched himself at Kyle with a speed that caught everyone off guard. 20 years of protecting this family had honed instincts that transcended physical limitation. Kyle stumbled backward, cursing as Shadow's weight knocked him off balance. The flashlight went flying, sending wild beams of light spinning across the ceiling. "Shadow, no!" Emma cried. Not because she wanted to protect Kyle, but because she knew her beloved companion's body couldn't handle the stress of combat. She could see the pain in his movements, the way his rear leg struggled to support his weight after the attack. Marcus pulled a gun from his jacket, and Emma's world narrowed to that single, terrifying detail. The weapon looked enormous in the shifting flashlight beam, its barrel tracking toward Shadow's heaving form. 20 years I've been waiting to finish what I started with this animal." "Please," Emma begged, dropping the baseball bat and stepping forward with her hands raised. "Don't hurt him. He's sick. He's dying anyway. Please." But Shadow positioned himself between Emma and the gun, amber eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Even facing death, even racked with cancer and arthritis, he would not abandon his post. This man had killed his first family. He would not be allowed to harm his second. The truth hung in the air between them like a living thing. Marcus Morrison wasn't just a random intruder. He was the man who had murdered Emma's parents 20 years ago, and Shadow, her faithful, dying companion, was the only witness left alive. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Emma's mind reeled as the impossible truth crystallized. This man with the scarred face had killed her parents, and Shadow, her dying, beloved Shadow, remembered. The wolf dog's labored breathing filled the silence as Marcus kept the gun trained on him, 20 years of hatred focused into a single moment of reckoning. "You were there," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You killed them." Marcus's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Your father was a good cop, I'll give him that. Too good. He was getting close to something he shouldn't have been investigating." His finger tightened on the trigger. "And this monster took half my face for his trouble." Danny Rivers backed toward the kitchen, his young face pale with shock. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. A simple robbery had become something far more sinister, a return to the scene of a murder he was now complicit in. "Marcus, man, we need to get out of here. This is insane." "Nobody's leaving until I finish this," Marcus snarled, but his attention was divided between Shadow and Emma. The wolf dog hadn't moved from his protective stance despite the obvious agony of holding position. His amber eyes never left Marcus's face, and in them burned a recognition and hatred that transcended species barriers. Emma's mind raced through fragmented memories and overheard conversations. Martha's hushed phone calls that stopped when Emma entered the room. The way her grandmother sometimes stared into the distance with haunted eyes. The fact that they'd never talked about the details of her parents' deaths, only that there had been an intruder who was caught and sent to prison. The timeline aligned with Marcus's probable release date, 20 years for murder, eligible for parole with good behavior. He's been out for weeks, Emma realized aloud. You've been watching us. Kyle Brennan, nursing a bruised shoulder from Shadow's attack, grew increasingly agitated. I don't care about your family drama. Where's the money? This place has to have something valuable. It was then that Emma noticed something that made her blood freeze. On Danny's wrist, partially covered by his jacket sleeve, was a tattoo. R.I.P. Dad, 2004. The same year her parents had died. The same year that had haunted her family's quiet conversations. She looked more closely at his face and saw something familiar in the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. Danny, she said carefully, what was your father's name? The young man looked confused by the question. Robert Rivers. Why? He died when I was 7. Some home invasion gone wrong. Marcus's head snapped toward Danny with sudden, sharp interest. Emma watched recognition dawn on the older man's face, followed immediately by something that might have been fear. Danny Rivers, Robert Rivers's son. Another name from the past that Martha had whispered late at night when she thought Emma was sleeping. Oh God, Emma breathed. Your father wasn't just a random victim, he was working with my dad. Danny's confusion deepened. What are you talking about? My dad was a security guard. He was undercover, Emma continued, pieces of overheard conversations finally making sense. They were investigating something together. Something that got them both killed. Marcus's gun swung toward Danny. Shut up. Both of you. Shut up. But Shadow chose that moment to act. Perhaps sensing that Emma's attention was divided, perhaps responding to some instinct that transcended his physical limitations, the old wolf dog lunged forward with a speed that belied his condition. Not at Marcus, he was too far away and too well armed, but at Kyle, who had been advancing on Emma while she was distracted. The impact sent Kyle crashing into Martha's antique bookshelf. Books cascaded down around them as Shadow's weight drove the younger man to the ground, but the effort cost Shadow dearly. Emma could hear his labored whimpering as his cancer-riddled spine protested the sudden movement. "Shadow!" Emma cried, dropping to her knees beside her companion. The wolf dog's breathing was rapid and shallow, his amber eyes clouded with pain. She could feel him trembling under her hands, his body giving out from the strain of protecting her. Touching, Marcus sneered. Just like 20 years ago. That animal threw himself at me to protect your father, gave me this lovely souvenir. He traced the scar on his face with his free hand. Cost him his life then, too. No, Emma said fiercely. Shadow lived. He survived, and he's been protecting me ever since. Not for much longer. It was Danny who spoke next, his voice shaking with a rage Emma recognized, the same fury that had sustained her through the darkest moments of growing up orphaned. You killed my father. Marcus turned the gun toward the younger man. Your father and Detective Blackwood were getting too close to my operation. They had to be eliminated. What operation? Emma demanded, still cradling Shadow's massive head in her lap. The wolf dog's eyes were fixed on Marcus, even in his pain maintaining his vigil. Arms dealing, mostly. Some drug distribution. Your father was building a case that would have put me away for life instead of the manslaughter conviction I got for killing him. Marcus's voice carried a twisted pride. 20 years I spent planning this moment. 20 years thinking about how I'd come back and finish what I started. Kyle struggled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the bookshelf. You're insane, Marcus. This was supposed to be quick cash, not some revenge fantasy. The cash was never the point, Marcus replied. Though there should be plenty here. Detective's widow probably got a nice insurance payout, survivor benefits. This family owes me 20 years of my life. Emma felt Shadow's breathing become more labored. His medication was wearing off, and the stress of the confrontation was taking its toll on his cancer-ravaged body. She made a decision that surprised even her. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out the small bottle containing Shadow's pain pills. Here, she said, dry swallowing one of the precious tablets before giving one to Shadow. At $47 each, she was consuming nearly $100 worth of medication. But if these were to be their last moments together, she wanted him to be as comfortable as possible. Danny watched this tender moment between girl and wolf with something approaching awe. How old is he? 20, Emma replied, stroking Shadow's silver muzzle. He's been with me my whole life. The only family I have left besides my grandmother. 20 years, Danny repeated, understanding dawning. He was just a puppy when Marcus murdered our parents, Emma finished. Shadow was being trained by my father. He was supposed to be a police dog, but after that night, he became my protector instead. Marcus's face contorted with rage. Enough of this sentimental garbage. That animal ruined my life, turned me into a freak. Do you know what 20 years in prison is like when you're marked up like this? When every gang member thinks you're weak because a dog got the better of you? You ruined your own life, Danny said, his voice gaining strength. You chose to become a killer. I chose to survive, Marcus spat. And now I'm going to finish what I started. The dog dies first, then the girl, then anyone else who knows too much about what really happened that night. Kyle looked between Marcus and the gun, making his own calculations. Count me out, Marcus. This has gone way too far. I'm not getting accessory to murder charges for your personal vendetta. You'll do what I tell you to do, Marcus replied, swinging the gun toward Kyle, or you'll join them. In that moment of divided attention, Shadow summoned reserves Emma didn't know he possessed. With a sound that was part growl, part roar, the old wolf dog hauled himself to his feet one more time. His legs shook with the effort, but his eyes blazed with the same protective fire that had saved James Blackwood's daughter 20 years ago. Emma realized with crystal clarity that Shadow was preparing for one final battle. His body was failing, the cancer and arthritis conspiring to steal his strength, but his heart, his magnificent, loyal heart, was still that of a guardian. He would not let this man harm his family again, even if it cost him everything. Shadow, no, she whispered, understanding what he intended. Please, boy. You've done enough. But Shadow's amber eyes met hers for just a moment, and in them she saw not just love, but a fierce pride. This was what he had been born to do. This was his purpose, his gift to the family who had raised him from a frightened puppy into a noble protector. He would not fail them now. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if the very night was holding its breath for what was to come. The living room became a tableau of impending violence, each person frozen in their role as fate's cruel drama prepared to unfold. Shadow stood trembling but resolute. 20 years of loyal service crystallizing into this single moment of ultimate sacrifice. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, his scarred face twisted with the hatred that had sustained him through 2 decades of imprisonment. Emma knelt beside her dying companion, one hand buried in his silver fur, the other reaching instinctively for the baseball bat she'd dropped. 20 years I've dreamed of this, Marcus whispered, his voice carrying the weight of obsession. Every night in that cell I saw those amber eyes staring at me. Every morning I woke up and felt this scar burn. Do you know what it's like to be marked by an animal? To have every convict in the yard know you were brought down by a dog? Danny Rivers backed against the kitchen doorway, his young face pale with the realization that he was witnessing the final act of a tragedy that had begun before he was old enough to understand death. His father's murder, Emma's orphaning, Shadow's transformation from police dog to family guardian, all of it led to this moment in a storm-lashed cabin where past and present collided with devastating force. Kyle Brennan watched the scene with growing alarm, finally understanding that he'd allied himself with a madman whose thirst for revenge transcended any rational goal. "Marcus, put the gun down. We can just take what we came for and leave. The dog's already dying. You don't need to do this." "You don't understand," Marcus snarled, never taking his eyes off Shadow. "This isn't about need. This is about justice. This animal destroyed my life, made me into a monster. Every scar on my body, every nightmare, every day I spent in that concrete hell, it all traces back to this creature." Emma's heart shattered as she watched Shadow struggle to maintain his protective stance. The pain medication she'd given him was beginning to take effect, but it couldn't erase the cancer eating at his bones or restore youth to his arthritic joints. Yet somehow, impossibly, he stood firm between her and the man who had shattered their family. "He was protecting his family," Emma said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Just like he's protecting me now. That's what good dogs do. They love us even when it hurts." "Good dogs," Marcus repeated mockingly. "This isn't a dog. This is a wolf, a killer, a beast that should have been put down years ago." It was then that the sound reached them through the storm, the distant but unmistakable wail of sirens cutting through the wind and rain. Marcus's head snapped toward the windows, his expression shifting from confidence to concern. "That's impossible. The phones are dead." Danny looked equally confused, but Emma felt a flutter of hope. Martha had always been resourceful, always had contingency plans. Perhaps she'd found a way to alert the authorities despite the storm's interference with communications. "My grandmother," Emma breathed. "She must have—" Marcus's reaction was swift and violent. He grabbed Emma by the arm, hauling her to her feet with brutal force. "Insurance policy," he snarled. "If the cops are coming, you're my ticket out of here." Shadow's response was instantaneous and devastating. Despite his age, despite his illness, despite the agony that racked his cancer-riddled frame, the old wolf dog launched himself at Marcus with the fury of 20 years' worth of protective instinct. His massive body struck Marcus in the chest, sending both man and gun tumbling backward into Martha's china cabinet. And the crash was tremendous. Glass shattering, wood splintering, precious family heirlooms exploding into fragments. Marcus screamed as Shadow's weight drove him to the ground, the wolf dog's teeth seeking the throat that had escaped him 20 years ago. But Shadow was no longer the powerful young animal who had first faced this monster. His jaws, weakened by age and pain, couldn't maintain their grip as Marcus thrashed beneath him. "Shadow!" Emma screamed as Marcus managed to throw the wolf dog off him. The gun had skittered across the floor, coming to rest near Danny's feet. For a heartbeat, everyone stared at it, the balance of power suddenly uncertain. Kyle made the first move, lunging for the weapon, but Danny was faster. The young man snatched up the gun with trembling hands, pointing it at Marcus as the older criminal struggled to his feet among the wreckage of the china cabinet. "Don't move," Danny commanded, his voice shaking but determined. 20 years I've wondered who killed my father. 20 years my mother cried herself to sleep, wondering why someone would take him from us." Marcus spat blood, his scarred face now bearing fresh cuts from the broken glass. "Your father was weak, just like this whole family. Weak and sentimental. He was a good man, Danny replied. "He was trying to protect people from monsters like you." The sirens were closer now, and through the storm, Emma could see the first flickers of red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. Help was coming, but Shadow lay motionless on the floor, his silver fur matted with blood from his collision with the cabinet. Emma crawled to him, cradling his massive head in her lap. "Stay with me, boy," she whispered. "Just a little longer. Help is coming." Shadow's amber eyes found hers, and in them she saw the same love and devotion that had sustained her through every difficult day of her 16 years. His tail gave the faintest wag, a gesture so heartbreakingly familiar that Emma had to bite back a sob. Marcus, realizing his plan had failed, made one last desperate grab for control. "You think this ends here? You think killing me solves anything? There are others, people who know about your father's investigation. This family will never be safe." "Maybe not," Emma replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "But we'll face it together, just like we always have." Kyle, finally showing some sense, raised his hands in surrender as the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the storm. "I'm done with this insanity," he announced. "I never signed up for murder." The front door burst open, and Sheriff Tom Bradley entered with his weapon drawn, followed by 2 deputies and, to Emma's amazement, Martha Blackwood. Her grandmother looked older than her 68 years, her face haggard from worry and the stress of emergency travel, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "Emma," Martha cried, rushing to her granddaughter's side, "thank God you're all right." "How did you know?" Emma asked, still holding Shadow's head. "I've been in contact with federal agents for weeks," Martha replied, her voice heavy with long-held secrets. "We knew Marcus was out, knew he might come here. I had surveillance equipment installed while you were at work." Sheriff Bradley and his deputies moved efficiently, securing Marcus and Kyle while Danny voluntarily surrendered the weapon. Marcus, even in defeat, continued to snarl threats and accusations, his voice carrying the impotent rage of a predator finally caged. 20 years, he kept repeating. 20 years of my life stolen by that animal. 20 years of life stolen from James and Sarah Blackwood, Sheriff Bradley corrected grimly, and their daughter's childhood, and Robert Rivers' family. You stole from everyone you touched, Morrison. As the paramedics arrived and began treating Shadow's injuries, Emma looked around at the wreckage of her living room. Broken glass, splintered wood, blood on the floor. But her family was alive. Martha was safe. Danny had found the truth about his father, and Shadow, her brave and faithful Shadow, had protected them one last time. The old wolf dog's breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes still tracking Emma's movements with devoted attention. The veterinarian who arrived with the emergency crew shook his head grimly as he examined Shadow's injuries, but Emma didn't need professional confirmation to know what she could see in her companion's eyes. This had been his final battle, fought with the last reserves of strength in his cancer-ravaged body. He had given everything to protect the family he loved, just as he had 20 years ago when he was barely more than a puppy. The circle was complete, the debt of loyalty paid in full. Outside, the storm began to break, and the first pale hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. The veterinarian's gentle hands moved over Shadow's battered form with practiced expertise, but Emma could read the prognosis in his somber expression long before he spoke the words aloud. Dr. Peterson had been treating Shadow for months, monitoring the progression of the bone cancer that had slowly been stealing away his strength. Tonight's battle had accelerated what was already inevitable. "I'm sorry, Emma," Dr. Peterson said quietly, his voice barely audible over the continued activity of law enforcement processing the crime scene. "The trauma from the fight has caused internal bleeding, combined with how advanced his cancer has become." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would shatter what remained of Emma's world. Emma's hand trembled as she stroked Shadow's silver muzzle, feeling the labored rise and fall of his chest beneath her palm. 20 years of unwavering loyalty, of morning walks and evening cuddles, of protection and companionship was drawing to a close in the wreckage of their living room. The wolf dog's amber eyes, though clouded with pain, remained fixed on her face with the same devotion that had defined their relationship since she was 2 years old. "How long?" Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "Hours, maybe less," Dr. Peterson replied with the gentle honesty that made him beloved in their small mountain community. "His body has been fighting this disease for months. Tonight, he gave everything he had left to protect you. I can make him comfortable, but—" Martha knelt beside her granddaughter, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. The tough, practical woman who had raised Emma with steady strength was finally showing the cracks in her composed facade. "He's been a good boy, sweetheart. The best boy any family could ask for." Across the room, Danny Rivers sat in a kitchen chair, giving his statement to Sheriff Bradley while keeping one eye on the scene unfolding around Shadow. The young man's face bore the complex expression of someone processing multiple tragedies simultaneously, learning the truth about his father's death, participating in the capture of his killer, and witnessing the slow farewell between a girl and her dying companion. "He saved us all tonight," Danny said suddenly, interrupting his own statement. "That dog, Shadow, he knew. He remembered Marcus from 20 years ago and still had the courage to fight him." Sheriff Bradley nodded gravely. "Animals don't forget betrayal. Or love. That wolf dog's been carrying the memory of your father's murder all these years, son. Tonight he got justice for both our families." Marcus Morrison, now handcuffed and bloodied, was being loaded into the back of a patrol car. Even in defeat, his voice carried venom as he shouted through the storm, "That animal should have died 20 years ago. This is all wrong. I'm the victim here." His words fell on deaf ears. The community had rallied around the Blackwood family, and Marcus's twisted logic found no sympathy among the people who had watched Emma grow up under Shadow's protection. Kyle Brennan, looking young and frightened now that the adrenaline had worn off, was cooperating fully with investigators, his involvement clearly that of a follower rather than a leader. Dr. Peterson prepared a syringe with practiced efficiency. "This will help with his pain," he explained to Emma. "He won't feel anything but peace." Emma pressed her face against Shadow's neck, breathing in the familiar scent of his fur mixed with the mountain air that had been their shared world. "Thank you, boy," she whispered. "Thank you for protecting us. Thank you for being my family when I had no one else. Thank you for remembering Dad and Mom, and for making sure their killer couldn't hurt anyone else." Shadow's tail moved almost imperceptibly, a final gesture of acknowledgement and love. His breathing had become so shallow that Emma had to watch carefully to see the movement of his ribs. The wolf dog, who had faced down a killer twice in his lifetime, was finally ready to rest. "I love you," Emma said, her tears falling freely now onto Shadow's silver fur. "I'll never forget you. Never." Martha's hand found Emma's shoulder, offering the silent comfort of shared grief. They had both lost so much, James and Sarah 20 years ago, and now Shadow, the living link to happier times. Yet somehow, in the midst of this profound loss, there was also a sense of completion. Shadow had fulfilled his purpose, had protected his family to the very end. As dawn's first light filtered through the broken windows, illuminating the destruction left by the night's violence, Emma felt Shadow's breathing slow, and then, with one final, peaceful exhale, stop altogether. The great heart that had beaten with such fierce loyalty for 20 years was finally still. The room fell silent, except for Emma's quiet sobs and the distant sound of the storm finally beginning to break. Shadow's vigil was over. After 2 decades of faithful service, of love given without reservation, of courage that transcended the limitations of his aging body, he had earned his rest. In his amber eyes, now closed forever, had been reflected the very best of what loyalty could be, absolute, enduring, and willing to pay any price to protect those we love. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Blackwood property as Emma sat beside Shadow's still form, unable to accept that her lifelong companion was truly gone. The chaos of the previous night had given way to a different kind of activity. Investigators photographing evidence, neighbors arriving with casseroles and condolences, and the slow, methodical process of piecing together 20 years of secrets that had finally come to light. Sheriff Bradley approached Martha with a manila folder thick with documents. "Mrs. Blackwood, we need to discuss some things that came out during Morrison's initial questioning. There's more to this story than even you knew." Martha looked up from where she'd been comforting Emma, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had carried too many secrets for too long. "What do you mean?" "Morrison didn't just kill James and Sarah randomly," Sheriff Bradley explained, settling into a chair across from them. "Your son and Robert Rivers were part of a multi-agency task force investigating a weapons trafficking ring that stretched from Colorado to Mexico. Morrison was their primary target." Danny Rivers, who had been quietly helping clean up the broken glass from Martha's china cabinet, stopped mid-motion. "My dad was undercover?" "Federal agent on loan from Denver FBI," Sheriff Bradley confirmed. "He'd been working the case for 8 months when Morrison discovered his identity. The attack on your families wasn't a random home invasion. It was an assassination meant to destroy the investigation." Emma felt the world shift beneath her as another layer of truth emerged. "So my parents didn't die because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They died because my father was trying to protect people." "James was the lead investigator," Martha said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of hidden knowledge. "I was his contact at the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit." "That's how I knew Morrison would eventually come back." The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Her grandmother hadn't been a simple veterinarian watching too many crime shows. Martha Blackwood had been FBI, had known exactly who killed her son and daughter-in-law, had spent 20 years preparing for Morrison's return while protecting Emma from the truth. "You've been living a lie," Emma whispered, staring at her grandmother with a mixture of awe and betrayal. "This whole time, you knew everything." "I knew enough to be terrified," Martha replied, reaching for Emma's hand. "After the murders, the task force was disbanded. Morrison pled down to manslaughter, got 20 years instead of life. I retired from the Bureau and took you as far from that world as I could, but I always knew he'd come back." Danny sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations. "So, we're both children of federal agents who died investigating the same case?" "More than that," Sheriff Bradley added, consulting his notes. "Your father, Robert Rivers, was James Blackwood's partner. They died on the same night in coordinated attacks meant to eliminate the key investigators. Morrison had help, a network of contacts that we're still unraveling." Emma's mind reeled as she tried to process the implications. Shadow hadn't just been protecting a random family. He'd been guarding the daughter of the man who died trying to bring Morrison to justice. The wolf dog's fierce loyalty took on an even deeper meaning, a sense of duty that transcended simple pet-owner relationships. "There's something else," Martha said, her voice barely audible. "Shadow wasn't just your father's canine trainee. He was specifically bred and trained to protect law enforcement families. Your father knew the risks of the investigation, knew Morrison was dangerous. Shadow was his insurance policy, his way of making sure you'd be safe if something happened to him." The truth about Shadow's purpose hit Emma with devastating clarity. Her beloved companion hadn't been a pet who happened to be protective. He'd been a living, breathing guardian angel, specifically prepared to defend her life. For 20 years, he'd carried out his mission with unwavering dedication, and tonight he'd completed it at the cost of his own life. He knew, Emma whispered, stroking Shadow's silver fur one last time. He always knew what he was supposed to do. Dr. Peterson, who had remained nearby in case Emma needed support, spoke gently. Animals like Shadow. They understand duty in ways we humans sometimes struggle with. He fulfilled his purpose completely. Not many of us can say that about our lives. As if summoned by the emotional weight of the moment, more vehicles arrived in the driveway. Federal agents, Emma realized, recognizing the unmarked cars and serious expressions. The case that had begun 20 years ago was finally reaching its conclusion, but the cost had been enormous. 2 sets of parents dead, children orphaned, a loyal animal sacrificed in the name of justice. Agent Sarah Chen, a woman about Martha's age, approached with the careful respect of someone who understood the magnitude of loss surrounding them. Mrs. Blackwood, Emma, I want you to know that your family's sacrifice hasn't been forgotten. The evidence your father and Mr. Rivers gathered led to the dismantling of one of the largest weapons trafficking operations in the Southwest. Dozens of lives were saved because of their work. But they died for it, Emma said, her voice hollow. And now Shadow's gone too. Shadow's death wasn't meaningless, Agent Chen replied softly. Morrison's capture tonight closes the final chapter on a case that's haunted federal law enforcement for 2 decades. More importantly, it means you're finally safe. Morrison was the last of the network with personal vendettas. The threat to your family is over. Danny looked up from where he'd been sitting in stunned silence. What happens now? I was technically part of Morrison's crew tonight, even if I didn't know what I was really involved in. Sheriff Bradley exchanged a look with Agent Chen before responding. Given the circumstances, your father's service, your cooperation tonight, the fact that you helped stop Morrison, I think we can work something out. Community service, maybe some counseling to help process what you've learned about your father. Emma stood slowly, her legs unsteady after hours of sitting beside Shadow's body. The physical and emotional toll of the night was finally catching up with her, but there was something she needed to do before the federal agents took over completely. I want to bury him next to my parents, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Shadow protected our family his whole life. He deserves to rest with them. Martha nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. James would want that. He loved that dog, trusted him with the most precious thing in his world. As the morning progressed and the official machinery of justice began processing the night's events, Emma found herself looking toward a future she'd never imagined. The truth about her parents' deaths, about Martha's real identity, about Shadow's purpose, it all changed everything she thought she knew about her life. But one thing remained constant: the love that had sustained their small family through 2 decades of secrets and sacrifice. Shadow's death marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new, a life free from the shadow of Morrison's hatred, built on the foundation of courage and loyalty that had defined the Blackwood legacy. 6 months later, Emma Blackwood knelt beside a granite headstone in the small cemetery overlooking Elk Ridge, Colorado. The marker read simply, Shadow, 2004-2024, Faithful Guardian, Beloved Friend. Fresh mountain wildflowers adorned the grave, placed there by Emma during her weekly visits. Beside Shadow's headstone stood 2 others: James Michael Blackwood, loving father, dedicated officer, and Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood, cherished mother, devoted teacher. The cemetery had become a place of peace for Emma, a sanctuary where she could process the dramatic changes that had transformed her life. The insurance settlement from her parents' federal service had finally come through, along with compensation for the years of secrecy and danger her family had endured. For the first time since childhood, Emma didn't worry about money for medicine or groceries. More importantly, she could pursue her dreams without the weight of financial desperation. "I got accepted to Colorado State," Emma said softly to the headstones, a ritual she'd maintained throughout the spring. "Veterinary program, just like I always wanted. They have a specialization in working with law enforcement animals, canine units, search and rescue dogs. I think Dad and Shadow would approve." A gentle rustling behind her announced Martha's arrival. At 69, Emma's grandmother moved with the careful dignity of someone learning to embrace a life no longer shadowed by secrets. The revelation of her FBI background had initially strained their relationship, but time and counseling had helped them understand that Martha's deception had been born from love, not betrayal. "Any word from Danny?" Martha asked, settling onto the small bench they'd installed near the gravesite. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile that had come easily since that terrible night. "He starts his senior year at University of Denver in the fall. Criminal justice major. Says he wants to finish what his father started, but through legal channels this time." Danny Rivers had become an unexpected constant in Emma's life over the past months. What had begun as shared trauma had evolved into genuine friendship, and recently, something deeper. He visited every few weeks, making the drive from Denver to help Emma and Martha repair the damage to their home and their lives. The young man, who had initially been Marcus Morrison's unwilling accomplice, had transformed into a source of strength and understanding that Emma hadn't known she needed. "He's coming up this weekend," Emma continued. "Says he has something important to discuss." Martha's eyes twinkled with the knowing expression of someone who had observed the growing connection between the two young people. "I suspect I know what that might be about." The sound of a vehicle approaching interrupted their quiet conversation. Emma turned to see Sheriff Bradley's patrol car winding up the cemetery road, followed by an unfamiliar SUV. As the vehicles parked, Emma recognized Agent Sarah Chen emerging from the SUV, carrying what appeared to be an official envelope. "Ladies," Sheriff Bradley greeted them with the respectful tone he'd maintained since that night. "Agent Chen has some news we thought you'd want to hear in person." Agent Chen approached with the careful bearing of someone delivering information that carried significant weight. "Emma, Martha, we've concluded our investigation into the Morrison network. I wanted you to be the first to know. Marcus Morrison was sentenced this morning. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of James Blackwood and Robert Rivers, plus additional charges related to weapons trafficking and conspiracy." Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a lingering sadness that justice couldn't bring back the people they'd lost. "What about the others in his network?" "Dismantled completely," Agent Chen replied. "Morrison's arrest led to a domino effect. 14 additional arrests, millions of dollars in illegal weapons seized, and most importantly, the threat to families like yours has been eliminated." Martha reached for Emma's hand, squeezing gently. "It's finally over." "There's something else," Agent Chen continued, extending the envelope she'd been carrying. "The federal government has established a memorial fund in honor of fallen agents James Blackwood and Robert Rivers. Part of the restitution from the Morrison Network seizures will go toward scholarships for children of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. Emma, you're the inaugural recipient." Emma accepted the envelope with trembling hands, feeling the weight of legacy and possibility it contained. Inside was a scholarship certificate that would cover her entire veterinary education, along with provisions for specialized training in working with police and rescue animals. "There's more," Agent Chen added with a slight smile. "The FBI is interested in developing a new program, training service animals specifically for families of federal agents working dangerous cases. They'd like you to consider heading the program after you complete your education." The offer took Emma's breath away. A chance to combine her love of animals with her family's legacy of service. to help prevent other children from experiencing the loss she'd endured. It seemed too perfect to be real. "I don't know what to say," Emma whispered. "Say yes," Martha encouraged. "Your parents and Shadow all believed in protecting people. This would be carrying on that tradition in your own way." As they walked back toward the cars, Sheriff Bradley fell into step beside Emma. "There's one more thing you should know. We're creating a memorial garden in town, a place to honor local heroes, both human and animal. Shadow will be recognized as the first K-9 officer in Elk Ridge history, even though he never wore an official badge." Emma stopped walking, overwhelmed by the cascade of recognition and opportunity. 6 months ago, she'd been a teenager struggling to afford medication for her dying dog while keeping family secrets she didn't even know existed. Today, she stood on the threshold of a future that honored the past while opening doors she'd never imagined possible. "He would have loved that," Emma said, looking back toward Shadow's grave. "He never asked for recognition, just the chance to protect the people he loved." As they prepared to leave the cemetery, a movement near Shadow's headstone caught Emma's eye. A small wolf pup, probably orphaned and lost, had wandered out of the forest. The pup approached Shadow's grave cautiously, sniffing at the wild flowers Emma had placed there. "Well, would you look at that?" Martha murmured, following Emma's gaze. The pup looked up at Emma with amber eyes remarkably similar to Shadow's, tilting its head with the curious expression of a young animal seeking connection. For a moment, Emma felt her heart leap. But this wasn't Shadow returned to her. This was something new, a chance to honor his memory through action rather than mourning. "Agent Chen," Emma said, an idea forming. "That program you mentioned, training service animals for law enforcement families. Would there be room for rehabilitation and training of rescued wildlife?" Agent Chen smiled, understanding immediately. "I think we could make that work." Emma knelt down, extending her hand toward the pup. After a moment's hesitation, the small animal approached, accepting her touch with the trust that wild creatures sometimes show to those with gentle hearts. "Welcome to the family," Emma whispered, thinking of Shadow's legacy and the future it would help create. The circle wasn't ending. It was beginning again, with new hope, new purpose, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and the animals who choose to love them. As they drove away from the cemetery, Emma looked back one last time at the 3 headstones standing together in the mountain sunlight, knowing that love like theirs never truly dies. It simply finds new ways to protect and serve. For those of us who've reached the golden years, we know that true family isn't always about blood. It's about unwavering loyalty, unconditional love, and the courage to protect what matters most. Emma's story reminds us that the bonds we forge with our 4-legged companions often run deeper than any human relationship. Shadow's 20-year devotion, his willingness to fight cancer and old age to protect his family one final time, speaks to something profound in the American spirit. The belief that love conquers all, even death itself. Many of us have walked this path, watching our faithful companions age alongside us, their graying muzzles mirroring our own silver hair. We've made those heartbreaking trips to the vet, held trembling paws as we said goodbye, and wondered if we could ever love another animal so deeply again. Emma's journey from grief to hope, from loss to purpose, shows us that honoring our pet's memory doesn't mean closing our hearts. It means opening them wider to continue the legacy of love they left behind. Their sacrifice teaches us that family is built on choice, not chance, and that sometimes the most profound love comes from the most unexpected sources. What beloved companion has taught you the deepest lesson about loyalty? How do you honor the memory of pets who protected your family? Share your stories below. Let's celebrate these 4-legged heroes together.